I'm now at the stage with this section of adding some of the clump foliage and fine leaf foliage just to give it that height and variation. At the moment it's very much different levels of grass and weeds and basically low-lying stuff. I want to give it a bit of height now that I've got everything else in place, and obviously I've got my discarded pallets, my discarded coils, my manhole, my masts, etc. I want everything just to come together. Obviously bushes and trees tend to sprout, and if they're not kept in check they grow quite, widespread and quite high, and I'm wanting a kind of variation in here. So what I tend to use for this is the underbrush from Woodland Scenics. It's kind of small clump foliage. I've got that in olive green and light green, and then I've got the bushes again in olive and light green. They just get sprinkled on and sealed in place. I've also got the fine leaf foliage, and that is code F1132 for the light green, and I've got F1133 for the olive green, and I've also got F1134 for the dead foliage, which is obviously good for an autumn scene or a late summer. So I'm going to use a variation of those. I've also got this light green foliage, which is kind of impregnated kind of polyfibre that you kind of rip off and shape and manipulate for low-lying dense bushes. And I've also got this Javis. It actually advertises itself as premier tree foliage, but to me it's too chunky and it looks like it could be good for some low-lying bushes and stuff, so I'll maybe have a look at that. So I'm going to use a variation of those things just to kind of give it some height and finish off the scene. As you can see, I've made a start here, and all I've done is I've taken the fine leaf foliage, which tends to come in rather dense chunks. Sometimes you'll be lucky and you'll get almost a perfect sapling tree out of it, but most of the time you've got to kind of rip bits off and manipulate what you've got. So if I kind of was to pull a bit apart there, I think it's made of sea foam as its base, sprayed and then foliage applied to it. But you see, I've got kind of stalks there. I don't particularly want those stalks there, so just snip, snip, snip. I don't want a tree, I want a bush. And I kind of manipulate it to suit myself, and then I just basically plant it, and again manipulate it out and spread it out depending on what I want from it. And that's as simple as that. It's not fixed down yet, that's the next stage, but I get everything settled in place first, looking right, and then I go along and I glue it. I'm going to move that one just now because I've got too much of the same colour, so I'm going to use that carefully. I'm going to use that somewhere else. Now I'm using a mixture of the olive and the light green here, but even the little twigs and offcuts you think, oh, they're just wasted, chuck them out. Don't. Just say, for example, that's an olive green, this is a light green. I'm just going to kind of put that in there like that, and it just gives them, maybe one type of bush that's dominating there and the other one's just, growing out the side. If you've got a garden, you'll know what I mean. There's always, the bush next to it impeding on this one's space. You've got to kind of separate them, but obviously in the wild it doesn't happen. So I'm just kind of using different tones that I've got, and just any little bits and pieces, even this little bundle here, think, well, how can I put that? I can stick that there, voila, done. If you don't like it, take it out, snip bits off, manipulate it, pull it, tug it, squash it, There's no right way and wrong to doing this. It's nature. It doesn't have a uniform way of growing. I'm kind of happy with the spread of the bushes that I've got there. Some are obviously quite large, some are smaller, some are intertwined with different colours. I really just want to maybe build up some of the lower growth there with some bushes. So I'm going to take a light green mix of the bush material. You just tend to pour some of this in your hand, and then wherever you kind of feel that you can do with some just coverage, just clump it together. It's just basically clump foliage. maybe just link it with the other bushes so it doesn't look like they're standing on their own all the time. Covering the gap here with a bit. Now the reason I'm not going too close to the track there is I've got the masts to put in for a start, and that would tend to be, you know, less overgrown because of the traffic going backwards and forwards and kind of keeping the bushes at bay. If I go to the, I'll try the olive green underbrush here. Let's take a wee handful of that. Bop it in here a wee bit of variation. Don't want to cover all the static grass that I've done here because I'm quite chuffed with the variations I've got in that. So I'm just kind of enhancing it with some of the bushes. Just, you know, basically blending in the bigger bushes with the scene round about. I think I'm quite happy with that. I don't want to overdo it. I want some bare patches. I want some bits where there's obviously a line of the bush going in the middle of the two, because if you look at inclines, and I've studied some pictures, you know, it's pretty higgledy-piggledy at times as well. There's a wee bit in there. I think I'm happy with that. What I'll do now is I'll leave it for a while, probably leave it overnight, and I'll think about it. I'll come back at tomorrow and say, yeah, am I happy with that? Can I add some more? Can I take some away? Obviously, if it takes some away, just lift it off. Nothing's glued down, and then we'll go into the gluing process, which is, you know, a case of lifting it up, dotted PVA, sticking it back down again. In the case of the bushes that I've just laid down there with the woodland scenic stuff, you just get a spray with the scenic cement and you seal that in place, and it'll adhere to the static grass below it. Another product that I'm using is the foliage, and it's light green, and I said earlier it's kind of impregnated fibre, and it comes in a sheet, and you cut a piece off to suit yourself. Try and make it as random looking as possible, but it's very difficult when you're cutting with a pair of scissors to get it to look like it's, you know, not just a square of mat. So I've kind of been manipulating it and prising it out and just working at it to try and get that kind of. You can spread it thinly for a low-lying weed, or you can kind of bunch it up, and once you're happy with it, you just pop it down in the layout, and it would get, you know, scenic sprayed like the rest of it. Or you could add another scatter to vary the, you know, the tone of the leaf. If you're not happy with it, just keep manipulating it. I have to say, I find this easier to use on the embankment. I tend to find this quite, you know, convoluted to use, to be honest with you. You seem to, you know, you've really got to blend it in round about with bushes. You can't stick on its own or it just looks stupid. So for example, I might then take some of my underbrush and just kind of blend it in like so. It looks like it's supposed to be there now. If it's got a wee straight edge there, again, you just take something else that you've got lying about, just soften it, we'll make it more natural looking. If you're not happy with that, just I've come along to the other end of the scenic area. This is where the incline starts, and obviously the tunnel mouth's there. What I've done so far with this section is I've used some fine turfs and some coarse turf to kind of give it a textured base layer on top of the brown paint. And you'll notice there's more in the way of greenery at the top, where the sun would get the slope more, and less at the bottom where it might be more in shade, and obviously the face of it is quite steep, so less would greenery would attach itself to that particular gradient. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some neat PVA in the areas where I want the static grass to go. So I'll do that just now, and then we'll go into the static grass. Now, if you dab it in, obviously if you want dense grass, you're better to put a bit more glue down, and when you want maybe more sparse grass, then you just maybe quickly go over it. Now I'm leaving a gap there because it would be a kind of walkway that's used by the track workers, plus the trains going past. It would keep the tall grasses back from the rail edge ever so slightly. So I'll continue doing this, and I'll show you when it's done. That's me applied the PVA. You can water it down a little bit, to make it go further if obviously you've got a large area to cover. I tend to use neat PVA on smaller areas because it's it's a stronger adhesive if it's not been watered down. But you can water it down. You can use your scenic spray at this point as well. Now some of you will say, well, what's the point in putting the coarse turf and whatnot down beforehand? Well, as you can see, I've not covered the whole area. It's more patchy. I'm going to have bushes and shrubs and small sapling trees and whatnot grown on the embankment, and I want that variation. I don't want it to be like a bowling green, so it's going to be patchy. Also, the coarse turf helps give it a depth, and you can get it to rise up in different levels and make it look less uniform. So I've got my static grass applicator here. Just plug it in. And what I tend to do as well is I get some sheets of paper just to cover an area that I don't want to cover in static grass. Just makes it less messy and easier to clean up. So I'll get some of that now. Got a couple of sheets up there, and then a couple down the bottom as well. I've just been using these for gluing earlier on, so I just rip strips off to put down there. Like so. That'll do. I can move them as I see fit. Right, so 2/3 at least full of the 6, 6.5, 4 varying tones of static grass, and I've just put the applicator on and then hover it above and then start to shake. And as you saw in one of our previous clips, it shoot out the bottom of the applicator onto the glued areas, in fact onto everywhere. And you can hear it hitting the paper, so you know it's coming out. And obviously the thicker you want it, the longer you stay on a particular area. Don't be worrying about the white paint, white glue showing through at the moment. That'll dry clear. A couple inches above the baseboard or above the area that you're doing is fine. If you go too high up, it'll lose the static attraction. You can vary it. And obviously where you've put an area where you've not put the glue, the static grass is still going to fall to a certain extent on that area, so you're going to have to obviously hoover it up at some point. Right, I'll go and finish that bit off in a minute. So there you have it. You'll see the bald patches where I've not put any glue. You'll still see some white bits where the glue is shining through. Don't panic at that. And what I tend to do now is I kind of manipulate it so the grass isn't all pointing the same way. You know, I'll push it back and forth like the wind's moving it, and obviously the draft of the trains going past has made it grow in a certain direction and all that kind of stuff. So I'll just go and do all that. You'll see at the bottom here it is also quite a pile of static grass. I'll have to obviously wait for it to settle and then I'll hoover that up. The area that I started was just at that last buttress there, and you can see the grass sticking up, and that's the 10mm on top of the 6, 6.5 and 4. You can see the variation in colours and heights. As I'm moving way along to the left here, the bit I've done earlier, I've added some coarse turf, which I'm going to do to this new scene shortly. The second layer of static grass has been sitting for a wee while now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start putting the fine turfs and the coarse turfs on top just to give it that variation. So I'll just start off with some blended turf and just shake it over random bits to darken it, like maybe a low-lying clover or a weed spreading. Down here perhaps. If you don't worry if you do too much, because you can always just tone it down with some other colour, you know, go over the top of it. This also has the depth and the thickness of the scenic area. And that'll do for that just now. Take some earth, put it in here, lighten it a bit, like it's burnt. Round about the tunnel entrance there. Fairly happy with that. Burnt grass, I like the burnt grass. It's fine. You don't have to do this, you can just leave it as natural grass, but I'm just going to try and get in that variation. And if I want to tone it down really, I just put some soil, like a darker bit. It's very gradually, very subtly. And when I'm happy with that, I get my coarse turfs out. And this is probably better, just open up straight away here and just sprinkle on. And again, if you put too much on, just hoover it up. Okay, so a wee bit here, along the edge, down the bottom. A bit of the coarse turf and burnt. grass tones, a bit more bushy there. Mix it up as well, we don't have a plant too samey. Alright, I think I'm quite done there actually, leave it there. You can always add more. If I want to take the tone off that I've just put down, I just take my turfs. That's the great thing about the woodland scenic stuff. Just add and, you know, keep adding. Because the next step will lock it all down. I think I'm going to leave it at that just now. And I'll do it tidy up, then I'll lock it all down with some scenic cement. The embankment has also been given the scenic treatment. Again, a variation of static grasses, clump foliage and woodland scenic's fine leaf foliage to give it that varying height and texture and tone. You can see where the grass is deeper at some points and more patchy depending on the slope. For example, down there just the right hand side of the mast there, earth showing through because it's quite a steep slope, and you know, weeds and grass don't adhere to, you know, sheer faces as well. Coming along towards the wall, which now looks very built into the scene, the end of the retaining wall there, with some more foliage, grasses and weeds, especially just before the wall there if I zoom in. Some really quite wild looking grass with some coarse turf and some earth down the bottom where it's more bare.